Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm: Dark Days Ahead. We have a pretty lean show this week, which is honestly really works out for me. It's a very busy week for me, so I don't have a ton of changes, but there is some cool stuff nonetheless. First up today, we've got Warped Trees. This PR is from NetSysFire, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It adds warped trees to the game. The idea here is that these trees were warped by a portal storm, and for a little bit of background, there were previously 3 dead trees in the game. There was a dead hickory tree, a dead pine tree, and a generic dead tree that was of no specific species. There are now warped versions of the pine tree and the generic tree as well. These were added to certain map gens specifically, so for instance they can appear in lab locations. I believe it also adds them to the world at random as well, but I could not find any of these naturally while I was exploring the forest. It's possible that they don't actually appear in forests at random, or it's possible that I just missed them because the tiles look basically identical to the regular dead trees. Anyway, there's not much to mention here. I just thought it was pretty interesting. It doesn't give you like special wood or like crazy alien fruit or anything. It's just a world building thing. But as is often the case, I just really like things that build out the world, and more stuff being affected by portals is pretty cool. Next up today from Carol1223, we've got a change to zombie animal fear triggers. So if you're not familiar, because probably most people don't know, but in the game there are a number of triggers attached to enemies. The easy example here are anger triggers, which cause an enemy to go from being neutral to being hostile towards the player. So some enemies have the trigger where if you get close to their baby forms, the adults would become hostile to reflect that they're trying to protect their young. Anyway, there is also a thing called a fear trigger. As far as I know, this will cause an enemy to start retreating away from you when it was previously attacking you. It causes it to be afraid. For many animals in the game, fire is a trigger that does this. Most animals are naturally afraid of fire, especially a big fire. However, in the game, zombies are not afraid of anything. They're zombies. They don't really possess the cause and effect chain of logic that would cause them to run away from a dangerous situation. Or probably lore-wise, it's more like they just are disposable foot soldiers, so they have no concept of self-preservation. But anyway, to bring all of that together, a zombie animal in the game previously had the fire fear trigger, and this doesn't make sense. They've stopped being animals at that point and are officially zombies, and as such they should behave more like zombies that are unafraid of fire. So Carol changed this. Now zombie animals will no longer retreat from fire, and they will behave more like their human zombie counterparts. Now ultimately this is a really simple and straightforward thing, but hey, I don't know how many of you were using this previously, to get an advantage over zombie animals, so it's something that's worth mentioning. Next up today from Hermuolio, we've got a change to the way Bionic fuel systems work in the game. So these would be the Bionics that let you use some kind of fuel to charge your batteries, like the gasoline fuel cell CBM, the ethanol burner, things like that. However, this does not include the metabolic interchange CBM since you don't directly fuel that. That just skims calories off of your calorie stores, or I don't know, however that thing works. Anyway, this is a pretty noteworthy change to how these work. Previously, if you had, say, the gasoline CBM, you would use the consume menu to consume, air quotes, gasoline. But now instead, you will have a pseudo item that gets added to your inventory. When you install the CBM, this will appear in your list of worn items. You can reload it using your normal reload command, and it of course would take gasoline as fuel. You can see the current fuel level of that reservoir in your inventory screen. Then we just open the CBM menu, we activate the CBM, and huzzah, it will begin charging. As time passes, you will gain more and more battery charge, and the fuel in that container will gradually deplete. Now there are a few important things to note here. First up, in the item worn screen in your inventory, there is a part that says remains, and it will list a volume next to it. As you burn more fuel, this actually ticks up and up. I believe this represents how much free space is remaining in that reservoir. However, I think this is a bit confusing because it makes it seem like that's the remaining fuel volume as opposed to the remaining free volume. I think that this should be changed. Maybe it should say free or something like that to be a little bit more clear. Additionally, if you press the capital S key in the CBM menu, you can set a threshold for the CBM to start or stop charging. So if you set it to 50% and then you charge up to 50%, then the CBM will stop consuming fuel and will stop generating energy. When you go below 50%, it will automatically begin charging again, so you don't have to enable or disable this manually. And this is a little different from how it worked before. It used to be you would have a threshold where the CBM would activate, and then you would set a threshold separately for where you wanted it to shut off. Now you only set that one number and the CBM will maintain at that level and use up fuel accordingly. But anyway, this of course works for multiple Bionics. I just was using the gasoline generator as an example. I actually think this is a really fantastic change. Using the consume menu was always a bit strange, and people would make jokes or be confused about like, oh, why is my character eating gasoline and things like that. I also like that it has a reservoir, so I can fill up all my CBMs and just keep them off until I need them. Now I'm not 100% on what the previous sizes were, so currently you can store 500 charges of gasoline, and I'm not really sure if that's the same amount you could store previously or not. And even if it is the same, which I kind of think it is, the other CBMs may have had their reservoir sizes changed. Alright, but anyway, we should talk about some of the concerns and issues surrounding this change. So first up, although I don't find it a problem personally, I'm sure someone is going to complain that this clutters up their items worn list in their inventory, or it makes it hard to parse or some such. And number two, because these are pseudo items that are being worn by the character, I've seen images posted of their protection values being displayed in a really silly way. You can find this in the layering menu. A quick glance shows this number, which I'm not going to say because it's too big. Let's just say it's like a bajillion cut protection. And yeah, these are listed in the layering menu. Again, I think someone might complain about that, but I don't really find that to be a big deal. And currently these things have a coverage of 0, meaning that they should never end up being struck by an attack or anything like that, like clothing would be. I think in the future, hey, maybe you could get shot in the gasoline fuel cell reservoir or something, but that's not in the game at the moment. And then there are a few official issues that people have posted on the GitHub connected to this PR. The ones I saw at the time of me writing this script, they were mostly connected to things that I've already mentioned here: the strange display in the layering menu, the auto on and auto off functions not working properly, etc, etc. So yeah, this is certainly a pretty visible change for any player using Bionics. I overall prefer this to using the consume menu to fuel Bionics, but I do understand that people might be frustrated that things don't work the way they have in the past. And yeah, I just don't have a whole lot of thoughts on this. I think it's a good change. I don't know. Let's just move on, I guess. Next up today, from Rennick CDDA, we have a PR that adds the Principles of Biology proficiency to some non-zombie creatures. So Principles of Biology is a baseline proficiency. It is required to get basically any other anatomy or biology proficiency in the game, which are of course tied to weak points and things like that. And this was a real problem. Let's say you were taking apart a bunch of spiders. You would hope to get the invertebrate anatomy proficiency, which would enable you to exploit the weak points of those creatures more easily. However, you couldn't actually get invertebrate anatomy unless you first got Principles of Biology, but you couldn't get Principles of Biology by dissecting spiders. You would have to dissect zombies or NPCs or whatever to get those principles. Okay, anyway, hopefully that wasn't confusing. The point is that Principles of Biology kept you locked out of the more advanced proficiencies, and the only way to get Principles of Biology was from humanoids, which obviously does not make sense. Coming back to this PR, Principles of Biology can now be obtained from some of the animals in the game. Actually, quite a few animals. They have a huge list of things that they added this to. So beavers, wild boars, bears, spy deer, mutant beavers, etc. There were quite a lot of animals that got hit with this PR. And the biggest list, I believe, were mammals, which is like the majority of animals you would come across in the game anyway. So yeah, a lot of things got this added. However, I did mention spiders specifically as an example here because in my testing I found that they still do not give Principles of Biology. Now maybe that is intentional, but I kind of think they just got missed by this PR. It's really the same logic that we just discussed above. They probably should have that proficiency. But anyway, still though, it's a great PR. Tons of animals now have Intro to Biology, so if you're trying to power level or like whatever you would call that to get a proficiency, dissecting mutant animals is a great way to go now because they're just very, very plentiful. Next up today from Drew4484, we've got graded steel weapons and recipes for those weapons. Now you probably remember Drew had added different steel types to the game, which changed a lot of recipes and things to reflect the different qualities of steel. And then there were several PRs that added new armors and recipes for those armors that would use the new steel types. Now this PR is the exact same thing, except it's done for melee weapons, so I'm not going to cover it in super detail, you probably get the idea. Now the first PR here added lots of weapons using the new steel types, and then a second PR added recipes for crafting those new weapons. Now looking at the PR, it says, quote, added new recipes for each grade of steel, but when I look in the crafting menu, things are a bit confusing. All of the recipes are listed individually, cluttering up these menus, but they are also listed as nested recipes. So what do I mean by that? Basically, for example, all of the katana recipes, hardened, etc., appear in the main list of recipes, but they also appear under a nested category for katana, so they are redundant. And that actually is the complaint that I've been seeing from people. No one wants to comment on the quality of the PR, they just want to complain about the crafting menu being cluttered. And listen, I get it, you're not wrong, this is a lot of stuff that was just added to the crafting menu. But I also feel bad for Drew because I see he put in a bunch of work and then look in the comments and it's just people saying like, oh well, you cluttered up the menu. Now I'm not going to touch on that much, like this is not a new issue, this is something people have complained about for a long time. But anyway, let's talk about the weapons themselves instead. The main weapons that were affected by this PR were the properly forged medieval weapon type things. So like a katana, an arming sword, things like that. But anyway, different types of steel means different durability and different damage for each of those types of weapon. And let's look at katanas as an example. I mean, who doesn't like a katana? Now there are now, dear God, 6 katana recipes. The low and medium katanas do not have the well-made or sturdy flag or whatever that flag is called that helps them resist damage, but all of the other recipes do, showing that they're more durable weapons. And then each of these katana, is it katana or katanas? Actually, I have no idea what the plural for, I'm going to say katana. Anyway, each of these has a slightly different cut damage and one of them has a slightly worse to hit damage. Now you may be asking yourself, why would the to hit value go down just because you're using a slightly different quality steel? And the answer here is that it wouldn't. It would be completely unaffected by that. The lowest tier katana actually uses a different grip, and so its to hit value ends up lower than the others. Now the grip does not actually have anything to do with the steel quality that's being used, it's just to reflect that this is a poorly made weapon. And now I brought this up on Discord, and apologies if I don't explain this super well, but I brought this up and rambled probably too much, and then people didn't really give me a satisfying answer about it. I have a tendency to talk at people, and I'm sure you know by now, like I'm a pretty critical person in general. So it seems to me that these weapons are different not based on their steel type, but more about the quality of the craftsmanship making the weapon overall. So the lowest tier katana, it's not actually a problem of it being made of low quality steel, it's more like it's just a poorly made weapon in general. And then the highest tier katana, yeah, it uses the highest quality steel, but it's more about it being a masterfully crafted weapon, using the culmination of all your forging and weapon crafting abilities. Anyway, I don't know if I explained my stance well or not, I know I didn't when we were talking on Discord, but these are my thoughts. It seems to me that these are named and separated based on the material that they're made of, what quality of steel is used for them. But their difference in damage, the change in the grips, things like that, that's not connected to the metal type, so it seems like these are based on quality. So I'm a little confused why they're named based on steel material when it's actually more about you making a crappy weapon overall. Now regardless of all that, I don't know if all that made sense. You should definitely check out the various new crafting recipes for these weapons. And we're just going to leave it at that. I don't know how that's going to turn out, but don't hate me. Moving on, next up today from Lovum, we've got a new trailer park. Now this one is laid out like an actual trailer park with an entrance and a roundabout with lots of trailers all around the area. Now this is, in my experience, what most of them look like. I know they come in all like shapes and sizes, but the ones I've seen the most feature this sort of roundabout style, and that's specifically my experience in the United States as well, worth mentioning that. I know they are different in other parts of the world. Now the PR uses nested chunks, which basically means that this should always be just a little bit different every time you come here. I'm always happy to see people making use of that feature. It's one of the cooler map gen features that we have, and this is a great place to use that feature because like you can just make a whole mess of trailers and then just plug them in at random, so they're always a little different. Now anyway, contributor nerdery aside, it's worth noting that these are not really truly mobile homes. Like our previous trailer park, these are set up as buildings, these are not vehicles. Now I've seen some people like push back on that previously in Discord, and there's really nothing wrong with that. In the United States, most mobile homes are not actually mobile. Most of them get transported somewhere and then they are set up permanently as a like a cheap building basically. Now I don't have a lot to say about this location, but I actually really like it. Now we did have a trailer park in the game previously, but it was very small, it always looked the same, and if I recall correctly, it spawned like just way too many dog zombies, which I guess is a joke, like haha, trailer park people have a lot of angry dogs, I don't know. Now this one seems much more like a small community, which is ultimately what a trailer park is. But I think that's probably all I have in terms of note here, so moving along. And then finally today I have two more things I want to talk about, but both of them include some pretty heavy spoilers. One is for stuff related to Hub 01. It's not lore spoilers, but it is spoilers for the location. And then the other one is connected to labs. This also, obviously has a spoiler for like endgame type stuff. The lab stuff in particular, we don't have a lot of endgame things, so I don't really want to spoil it for people who don't want to be spoiled. So this is your warning to go away. Everyone else, while we wait, here's a photo of my dog that I found from several years ago. It's blurry, I know, but he is adorable, so you're welcome. That's my wiener dog, by the way. He's my favorite. Alright, so first up from Candleberry, we've got the addition of a hub bar. Hub being Hub 01 and bar meaning, the place you go to drink. To the north of the main hub building is a meteorology center. There's really not a whole lot going on in this building. It's a pretty basic place and there's really nothing noteworthy. However, now over time the building will change. NPCs will arrive and barricade the building with sandbags under the guise of protecting themselves from portal storms. They open up one of the wall tiles with a staircase leading down. Once you go down, you'll find a bar which they've built for themselves. There's a handful of NPCs here, including a proper bartender that can trade you a bunch of different alcohols. There's also a gun runner, a mercenary, and someone who sells ID cards. Now it is possible I missed an NPC here or something, but those are the ones that I would be most interested in as a player. Having an NPC sell ID cards is actually really cool. It's pretty great that you could potentially just buy them for yourselves instead of like grinding to try and find one. Although to be fair, I guess they were a lot more valuable way back in the day when I first started playing. Nowadays I just carry a pickaxe everywhere. I don't need to worry about ID cards. As for the gun runner, obviously, most players would love to trade with a gun runner. Unfortunately, there seems to be a bug at the moment where they're unable to sell any of their weapons. When you open the trade menu, you will see a list of things and there will be a message that says they will never sell those things. It seems that the logic is borked. Normally, this is a mechanism to keep NPCs from selling their personal equipment, like they're not going to sell you their underwear, obviously. But it looks like this is considering all of the weapons in the trade menu as their personal equipment, and so they will not sell them. On a related note, I do think that these messages need to be shortened. They are all cut off on my screen, so I don't really even know what exactly the message says. Printing the NPC name in every single message seems completely unnecessary, and it really makes them a lot longer. Now, at first, I thought they were just cut off because I had my display scaled up 25%, but it looks like that even when it's not scaled. Anyway, this kind of time-based progression for a location isn't exactly common in the game. This is the first example I remember seeing. When I brought that up to Candleberry, they said that there's a traveling caravan that works the same way, but this is a bigger example, and honestly, I think it's really cool. Having progression to our factions, that's a fantastic feature. Imagine going to the refugee center on day one and having everything, hastily put together, cluttered, people hungry, begging, things like that. And then over time, as you return, maybe they fortify the building, maybe they have more stuff to trade, maybe some of the beggars get promoted to full-on members of the faction. Things like that I think are really interesting. So yeah, there's a bar now and probably more to come for this location in the future, and the concept of what's being done here has some really great possibilities for the future as well. I'm really happy to see this. I can't praise it enough. It's not actually going to like shake up your game a lot, but the implications of this place are super cool. Alright, and then finally today we come to the lab changes that I was supposed supposed to talk about. I'm actually re-recording this. Seems like every episode these days I mess up something and have to completely re-record it. Now initially I saw this PR from Candleberry that was supposed to add some warped portal style stuff for labs that you would find in the subway. And at first I thought this was a really big change that, changed a ton of stuff. There's a reference in the PR to a mini boss, so I was really excited to jump in and cover this. However, it turns out that mini boss is not actually in the game yet. That's something that will come in the future. And when I actually reached out to Candleberry to ask some questions about this change, I had been having a lot of trouble getting it to spawn in the game and things like that. So when I reached out to Candleberry, they basically said if I'm not familiar with the way it used to be, then I wouldn't actually know the difference. And that turned out to be true. I really haven't been playing the game very much lately, and the times that I do, I haven't really explored any subway labs. So the exact changes here, I'm not 100% on what all changed, so I'm just gonna point this out and turn you loose to explore. It seems like it did add some new stuff for subway style labs, specifically mutable ones, which are the big cross-shaped ones that you would find. And the PR added things like a black glass terrain, which actually, if you go far enough down in the map, there's a huge ocean of black glass, which I think is actually really kind of creepy and weird, and I like it a lot. And then there was other furniture items including alien metals, so woven together into a mesh, which I believe is referred to as electronics, things like that. So it's really hard for me to kind of cover what I wanted to cover and talk about it when I lack the experience necessary. So instead, I'm just going to point those things out, and you're going to have to find it for yourself, which unfortunately kind of defeats the purpose of making a video like this, is because it's my job to tell you about things. So hopefully no one's mad about that. And yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say. Of course, there will be a link to the PR in the description. This is built on the back of something that Candleberry had done about a year ago when he worked on mutable labs and adding portal style stuff to a lab in the first place. And yeah, that's all I've really got for that. Sorry about that. But with that, I think we're gonna wrap the show. And to be perfectly honest, this week sucked. So it was not a great week for me, and it was really hard to get this video out. I'm struggling a lot with YouTube stuff and balancing with my personal life with things that we talked about previously, and I usually try not to unload too much in this series because people tell me you're unprofessional. It's just been real hectic in my life currently, and coming to do YouTube stuff when I'm not feeling particularly fulfilled by it has been very difficult. And so yeah, that's how we end up with a show like this that is probably ultimately pretty mediocre. And so yeah, everyone, thank you for watching. Of course, thank you for listening. Hopefully I taught you something. I know the lab stuff was a little not fleshed out, but of course that's stuff you can explore on your own, and I will keep an eye on it more closely in the future so that when those updates do come, we'll be able to discuss them and I'll actually know what I'm talking about. So yeah, thanks for being here, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another episode, so I'll see you next time.